This is Tamara from Project Team speaking. Thank you so much for joining the session. This session is being recorded, and the recording will be, as usual, published on our feature demo video recordings page. Today, we're going to cover what has been implemented in projects and time and expenses modules in 2020 R1 beta. First of all, we will talk about project retainage modes. And meanwhile, I will kindly ask you to mute yourself unless you're going to ask a question. And we will devote some time, some specific time for asking questions after each section. So we will talk about project retainage modes. We have introduced some new project retainage modes in 2020 R1 beta. And also, we will cover project balance reconciliation issues, which include some refactored logic that helps us eliminate inconsistencies. And also, we will touch some other project transactions improvements and some other miscellaneous enhancements. Let's start with the new retainage modes in Acumatica. First of all, we have introduced the new retainage modes, and we will review all of them, all the retainage modes that are now supported in Acumatica 2020 R1 beta. Also, we will follow an end-to-end scenario for progress billing with contract cap retainage. We will touch upon time and material billing with steps in standard retainage mode. And also, we will certainly learn how to configure all those various retainage modes. In order to be able to utilize all the new retainage modes, you will need the two features enabled on the feature set: retainage support feature and payment application by line feature. However, if you are not using payment application by line, you will still obtain a new retainage mode. This is the standard retainage that you are already used to, but with steps. And we will cover the steps a bit later. The projects form now acquires a separate section for retainage settings. And in this retainage settings, you will see the retainage percent that you are used to, and also the ability to select a specific retainage mode. And depending on the retainage mode you choose, you will also have an opportunity to specify some other retainage settings in this section. What is more, you can set up the retainage on your project template and utilize different project templates for the projects that need to use some specific retainage settings. Depending on the retainage mode, the projects form, the revenue budget tab, either has or does not have the retainage percent column. Also, the new attributes appear on the revenue budget tab of the projects form. These are draft retained amount, and total retained amount. Speaking about the pro forma invoices form, the retainage amount column now can also be either editable or non-editable, depending on the retainage mode you are using for your project. The retainage amount is the thing that differentiates your retainage modes. And depending on the retainage mode you select for your project, the retainage amount will be calculated differently. Certainly, if you use standard retainage mode, everything works just the same way it used to be in the previous Acumatica versions, and retainage amount in your pro forma invoice will be calculated as amount to invoice multiplied by retainage percent, and also in the accounts receivable invoice if you are not using pro forma. However, if you are using pro forma and you choose to use the cap retainage, either contract cap or contract item cap, you will see that there is a slight difference in calculating the retainage amount. Each time you generate a pro forma, the system will first of all calculate the potential standard retainage amount, calculated as usual, and compare it to the cap amount. We will see what cap amount is for the cap retainage modes a bit later. And in case you're exceeding that cap, the system will subtract some difference from the standard retainage amount in order not to exceed that cap amount. The cap amount for contract item works the same way as for the contract, but in the framework of a specific revenue budget line. This presentation will also be published with the video recording on the page for feature demo video recordings, and you will be able to go via the link and in detail see how retainage amount is calculated. Besides retainage amount, the pro forma invoice now also has the allocated retained amount column. And this allocated retained amount is applicable only to contract cap retainage mode. You should always bear in mind that allocated retained amount is just a reporting field. It is used for your information and for the purposes of reports. It does not go into the accounts receivable invoice. What goes into the accounts receivable invoice is your retainage amount. Now let's talk about contract cap retainage. In order to use contract cap retainage, you should select contract cap retainage mode, specify the retainage percent and the cap percent. What does contract cap retainage mean? It means that for instance, you have an agreement with the customer that until you finish a certain portion of your contract, they will retain some amount from you and you won't bill it until you finish a certain portion of your contract. However, if you do not want to be retained too much amount, for instance, you need to pay your employees and etc., you should also protect yourself from being retained too much, and you will set the cap. And thus, the system will calculate your cap amount based on the contract total, which is calculated as the sum of the original budgeted amount if include change orders is false, and as the sum of the revised budgeted amount if include change orders is true. And then the system multiplies this contract total by the retainage percent and cap percent to calculate the cap amount. This is the maximum retainage amount that can be held each moment per your project. And once your invoices reach this retainage cap amount, no new retainage will be calculated. Speaking about the projects form, the revenue budget tab in this retainage mode, it has the draft retained amount, the retained amount, and total retained amount. The draft retained amount is calculated by pro forma invoice lines and unreleased accounts receivable invoice lines. But you should always remember that by accounts receivable invoices here, I mean the invoices originating from project billing and that are not retainage invoices. So I mean just the ordinary billing accounts receivable invoices. The retained amount is calculated by the released accounts receivable invoices. Also, the contract cap is applicable only to those projects that utilize progress billing. It makes no sense if you use time and material billing. And what is more, there is a validation for create performer on billing checkbox. In order to be able to utilize all the functions of contract cap, you will have to select create performer on billing and go through pro forma billing. The pro forma invoices in this mode looks as follows. It has the retainage amount, the allocated retained amount, and both of these columns are non-editable in this retainage mode. And as usual, it calculates the retainage total and shows you the retainage percent in the header instead of the lines as you are used to in the standard retainage mode. And also it shows you the total allocated retained amount. The accounts receivable invoice, the AR 301000, is not changed by this feature. Just as usual, the retainage amount from the pro forma will go straight to the retainage amount of the invoices and memos form. And now let me switch to Acumatica system and show you how this contract cap works in real life. So you see, I have a project with contract cap retainage mode, and let's imagine I'm building some film set construction, and I have already billed my customer, so I have some actual income, and I have 2 pro forma invoices which have already been released, and the related accounts receivable invoices. And let me show you the first pro forma. It looks just the same way as the pro forma for project with standard retainage. So you can see the retainage amount here and some allocated retained amount, which at first sight equals the retainage amount at first moment of time, because we haven't reached the cap yet. And because we haven't reached it, the retainage is calculated just as usual, amount to invoice multiplied by the retainage percent. And the retainage amounts have just as is flown into the accounts receivable invoice. So here it is. The retainage amount looks the same as in a pro forma. And I have some unreleased retainage because I haven't released any retainage yet. The second invoice looks the same way. We also haven't reached the cap yet, and the retainage amount is calculated as amount to invoice multiplied by the retainage percent. And now you see that allocated retained amount is no longer equal my retainage amount. Right now, in this pro forma number 2, application number 2, this allocated retained amount equals retainage amount from this pro forma plus retainage amount from the previous pro forma. So far, so good. But what if now I exceed my cap percent? I will bill more. I will perform another progress billing iteration. Let's say some 83% and 78%. Here we go. We have some provisioning for progress billing. I will run project billing to generate a new pro forma. And now you see that retainage amount is no longer equal amount to invoice multiplied by retainage percent. That is because in this application number 3, we can exceed the cap if we do not perform some recalculation of the retainage amount. And in order not to exceed this cap, we use some differentiated formula. So we calculate the standard retainage and subtract some difference from it. And in case you are interested in all the formula that are applied to retainage amount calculation, there are several iterations in retainage amount calculation. You will go to the page that will be specified in the presentation attached to this recording on our feature demo video recordings page. And the allocated retained amount is also no longer equal all the retainage amounts added to each other from the previous pro forma and this very pro forma. This happens because this allocated retained amount, as I have already mentioned, is for reporting purposes, and it is calculated based on each line weight in this very pro forma. This field, this column, is usually used for the AIA report in construction area. Let me go back to my project. And review my revenue budget tab. You see that I have some draft retained amount, and this is okay because we have just generated a new draft pro forma, and I have some retained amount, and this is calculated based on the released accounts receivable invoices. Let me release this pro forma. And you will see that the draft amount will flow to the retained amount, kind of actual retained amount. Just a moment. Oh, I need to firstly release the accounts receivable invoice.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Doug. Okay. And I will once again validate project balances just to be sure. Here we go. Retained amount now equals all the released accounts receivable invoice lines retainage amounts. Okay, and what happens if now I decide to bill even more? Because right now we have already reached the cap. We have completed we have completed 74% of our project. This means that totally retained amount for all my project invoices already equals 150. And I expect that in the next pro forma, I will have no new retainage amount calculated. Let's check it out. Okay, I have some provisioning for one more billing iteration. And you see that no new retainage is calculated. Retainage amount equals 0, but allocated retained total calculated based on the weights of pro forma lines in each invoice and based on already retained amounts equals 150. Correct. And we will calculate no more new retainage unless the cap amount changes. And this can happen due to a change order release, of course. Let me go back to my project and release a change order to increase my contract total, because you see that this cap amount is calculated based on my contract total, retainage percent, and cap percent, meaning if the contract total increases, my cap amount will also increase. I have released the change order. And my contract total has increased. My completed percent has, of course, decreased because of this increase. And now my cap amount has the new value. And this means that if I decide to bill my project once again, I will now have some more new retainage calculated. So you see, here is some retainage amount. And this has happened because our cap amount has increased and we had some more retainage to calculate for my project. So now, let's say I'm finishing my project and I'm ready to release some retainage. The retainage release stays the same, but the only thing that changes is because we are using payment application by line, and now we can release that retainage by line. And when you are navigated to the release accounts receivable retainage, you need to filter the form in the correct way to see all the accounts receivable invoice lines that have non-zero retainage for your project. Here are all the accounts receivable invoice lines with unreleased retainage. And let me also filter this form by project task 1. Here we go. We are ready to release retainage for our task 1. I will select all the lines and process them in order to generate the new retainage invoices. And now, if we go back to our project, we will see that there are new invoices generated on the Invoices tab. Those are retainage invoices, and they can be easily recognized with the help of the indicator retainage invoice. And when you have a lot of those invoices, you might not want to release them one by one. You can do that in bulk on the release accounts receivable documents. And I will release them all at once. Great. And let's get back to our project. I will take a look at my revenue budget, and you see that now my retained amount is equal to 0 because we have just released all the retainage from the corresponding accounts receivable invoice lines. The drafts are from the pro forma invoices that we haven't processed further. And if we take a look, for instance, at the first accounts receivable invoice, we will see that for my task 01, unreleased retainage is equal to 0. So this is the balancing value, and so is the retained amount value on the projects form. So this balance shows you how much unreleased retainage you still have. Okay, then. This has been the contract cap retainage mode, and let's get back to our presentation and take a look at some other retainage modes. So these slides just show you the process that we have just gone through. And before we proceed with other retainage modes, are there any questions concerning contract cap retainage? Okay, in case any questions appear, you will also be able to ask them by the end of the presentation, or please feel free to text me, Kate, Anastasia, anyone in the projects team, and we will be glad to help you. Okay, contract item cap retainage. Contract item cap retainage is just the same as the contract cap retainage we have just looked through, but you do not specify cap amount on the summary of the project, but you do that for each specific revenue budget line. You can specify different retainage percent and cap percent for each revenue budget line, and the system will calculate the cap amount for you. And for each revenue budget line, the system will validate on each billing iteration whether you're exceeding this retainage cap amount for this very line or not. And in case you are, the retainage amount in the pro forma invoice line will be recalculated according to the adjusted formula. Let me quickly go to the system and show you the project with contract item cap retainage. So you see, we do not specify any cap amount on the summary of the project, but we can specify any retainage percent and cap percent for each revenue budget line. And similarly to contract cap, we have our draft retained amount and retained amount for each revenue budget line. And the release of the retainage happens just the same way. And also, I would like to cover the stepped retainage. And speaking about steps, the Use Steps checkbox can be applied both to standard retainage mode and contract cap retainage mode. And what does this stepped retainage mean? It means that the system will automatically change your default retainage percent to another value once you reach the threshold value of the completed percent. So you see here on the slide, for step 1, once we haven't yet completed anything for our project, we have the 5% retainage applied. But here on the step 2 picture, you see that we have already built our project, built the customer for our contract completion, and the completed percent has exceeded this very threshold value, and the 3% default retainage will be applied. So this default retainage works just the same way as for the previously existing standard retainage mode. So this is used as the default for accounts receivable invoice lines created manually on invoices and memos form. This is used as the default value for revenue budget lines, progress billing, and for time and material billing in the time and material pro forma lines. Okay, and accounts receivable lines. Now let me show you in the system how this works. Here is my project where I am utilizing the standard retainage mode with steps. And you see that I have completed just 25%, meaning that 5% is still applied to my invoices. And now if I run more project billing, I have already released some transactions, so I have some unbilled actuals for my project. I will run project billing. to generate another time and material pro forma invoice, and you see that 3% retainage is applied to it because we, with this very invoice, reach another threshold value, and this means that step 2 of the standard retainage will be applied to our project. So basically, that's it, what I was going to show you about the retainage modes in project, and it works just the same way for progress billing standard retainage mode. So in case you want to use steps, you will easily do so, and these steps will be applied to your progress billing tab of the pro forma invoices. You cannot use steps with contract item cap retainage. You can only use steps with standard retainage and contract cap retainage. Are there any questions concerning the stepped retainage?
From a positioning standpoint, is stepped retainage kind of table stakes for all construction systems, or is this a competitive advantage for us?
It does not require construction edition. So this, what I have just shown, is in the core. So you can easily utilize those steps with any project.
Excuse me, I think the question was a little bit different. Yes, it is a competitive advantage of our product compared to the others.
Oh,
okay,
sorry,
great.
I haven't heard the competitive. Okay.
Right,
yeah.
It seemed quite involved. That's why I was wondering. Thanks.
Okay, if there are no any other questions concerning the retainage modes and projects, I will pass the word to Anastasia, and she will cover all other enhancements and new features that we're introducing in Acumatica 2020 R1 beta. I will stop sharing my screen.
Hi everyone, this is Anastasia from Project and Construction, and I'm gonna start sharing my screen just a second. I hope that you see the presentation. Well, this is what I'm quickly going to cover, and just to start the...
We see the notes screen. I mean, it doesn't matter, but
oh, sorry.
Might be showing the wrong one.
Thank you for... Okay.
Perfect.
Yeah, you see it? Okay, cool. Thank you very much. So yeah, so I'm going to quickly cover those points, but just to start, I'm going to say that this feature was initially required because there were a lot of issues with the project balance reconciliation, and meaning that it was hard to find transactions that correspond to the project, to the account groups, and to reconcile the project balance, and to find to understand how the figures were calculated, and to find specific transactions, and to troubleshoot, understand whether the proper project transactions that are needed were created in the project for the project, or whether they were correlated with the general ledger transactions. So we tried to tackle those problems, and I will tell you in a second how. I will start with saying that we one of the things that we changed was renaming the screens. We had 3 different screens with the same name, project transactions. The entry form stayed the same with the name project transactions, but then the inquiries form was changed to project transaction details, and the report form was changed to project transaction register. This was done to make it easier and clear for the users to navigate themselves. Well, one of the problems with the reconciliation of the balance and with working with project transactions was that the inquiry form, which is now project transaction details, was not sufficient enough, and did not have all the scenarios for searching for the transactions and for finding transactions that the users need. So we made a few enhancements and added some attributes and filter scenarios. So first of all, we added filter attributes. account, the attributes that allow to search transactions that are related to IR document, IR doc type, and IR document number, and the attribute that allows to search the transactions, the individual transactions. I will tell in a bit that we also added a column where we exposed the individual transaction ID, which is the internal number, the internal ID of the transaction in the system. But knowing this ID, knowing this number, users will be able to navigate and to find the transactions that they need. Also, all the filter attributes, they work as with the logic operator AND, so users are able to find transactions that are, for example, related to the IR document, but then related to specific account group. So this I will show in a few moments how it works in the system. And also what changed is that previously users on the inquiry form were able only to look for the project transactions that are related to one project. Now they are able to look for the transactions, for the cross-project transactions, and self-sufficient filter attributes, meaning the filter attributes that trigger the search of the transactions are all, besides project, also account group, account, IR doc type and IR doc number, and transaction ID. Next, besides looking for the transactions, on the project transaction details form, when the user find the transaction that they need, they want to and they can see the information about that transaction. And the problem was that that information was not descriptive enough. The attributes were not descriptive enough, and they were not always consistently filled, and there were not enough information. So we added a few columns. We added a hidden collection of columns, excluded from allocation, excluded from balance, excluded from billing, and excluded from billing reason, transaction ID. Also, we moved the IRIG doc number that was previously in the selected columns section. We renamed it to old original doc number and moved it to hidden collection, because we added a new IRIG doc number, which is now more consistently filled and contain links, hyperlinks to the originating documents that originated project transactions. Then, to the default grid columns, we also added project column and proforma ref number. And we altered a few columns. We removed amount normal column, which was a calculated column. It was calculated on the form. It was not in the database. And we removed it because it was not responding to the client's needs, and it was confusing them. And the amount reversed, that was called, and which correlates to the amount of the transaction in the that is stated in the batch, is just renamed to the amount, as it is in it is called on the project transaction entry form. So this, as I said before, we added the opportunity to search for individual transaction by using this transaction ID that is now exposed for the project transactions. Now I will explain a little bit further the meaning of the excluded from allocation and excluded from billing new columns, new project transaction attributes. So previously there was a confusion. There was a confused meaning of the field of the column allocated when it had a value true. So when the transaction was actually allocated, the allocated column for this transaction had a meaning true. But when transaction should have not been allocated, the allocated column also had a meaning true. So that could be, for example, the case when the transaction already was allocated and the user chose that it will not be used in further allocation. But it would be, or if the transaction was the reversing transaction, it also should not be used in allocation. So the allocated true had a double meaning, and it was confusing for the users. Now there are two separate columns. First is allocated true stays the same if the transaction was actually allocated, but if transaction should not be allocated, the allocated will be false, but excluded from allocation will be true. Same situation as with the billing process. If the transaction previously, when the transaction was billed or should not be billed, the billed column was used, and we had support cases, support requests when users were asking why the transaction has billed true when it was not used in billing. That was because it was the second case. Now, when the transaction was billed, the billed is true, but when it should not be billed, the excluded from billing has value true. And to make it even clearer for the users why the transaction is excluded from billing, we added the column excluded from billing reason, where we show the short description of the reason why the transaction was should not be billed. It's either reversed or a reversal of the transaction. It is a result of error document, either credit memo or error invoice. It was written off with the credit memo. It will be billable, or it is billable with the case billing procedure, or it is reversed with the work in progress scenario. A few other enhancements related to that is that the project transaction is now with the new filter scenarios is a useful tool to find the transactions that are related to either IR document or to the that they have corresponding general ledger transactions, and to ease the ease for the users finding those transactions and opening the project transaction detail form, we added a few links. So standing on invoices and memos form and having the project or the IR invoice or IR document opened that has corresponding project transactions, users can click on inquiries and view the project transactions, and the project transaction inquiry will be open. Then for the account details and for journal transactions, we added to the hidden collection a project transaction ID column that contains hyperlinks with the transaction ID of the corresponding project transactions that correlate with the general ledger transactions. So if the general ledger has the project transaction corresponding, it is going to have the hyperlink in that column. And clicking on the hyperlink, user will open the project transaction detail form with this transaction selected. And now let me go into, let me open the system to show how it works. So if the user is on the, I hope that you see the screen.
Not yet.
Okay, thank you.
Might probably need to reshare.
I will, yeah. So if the user is in the project form and looking at the balance and want to see the transactions that correspond to the account group, for example, a user can open the project transaction details form and navigate themselves to to this form either through clicking on View Project Transactions or by opening the form. And then they can use multiple filter scenarios to look for the transactions that they need. So for example, here it is open the transactions for the IR invoice IR 7056. You can see that these are the transactions that were both they used as a provision used for the creation of this IR invoice, as a provisioning for the IR invoice, and also then the invoice ref number has the hyperlink to this IR invoice, and this transaction has billed true. And also there are transactions that were originated by the release of this IR invoice, and then they the number of this IR invoice is in the ARIC doc number column. The hyperlink is here, and they obviously they don't have billed true because they were not yet billed. So yes, this other transaction. For example, if we want to, if the user wants to find a specific transaction, for example, out of this one, let's just say that we have this number and we want to enter, and then just one transaction will be shown. If the user is looking at in the journal in the general ledger patch and want to know whether these transactions have corresponding project transaction, whether just want to troubleshoot and make sure that everything is all right, they can move the project transaction ID, sorry, to the selected column collection and see here the hyperlink to the project transaction detail form. And you probably don't see the pop-up window.
We do. Everything
You
is
do.
okay.
Thank you. So yeah, that navigates to this form with the selected transaction ID. Same is with the account details. So for example, if user look at the account, the specific account, then they can see that some transactions that they have project transactions corresponding, and they can open and make sure that the numbers are okay and that everything is everything that should be written in the project, it is there. And if the transaction, if the general ledger transaction does not have a corresponding project transaction, then this column will be empty. And also on the project transaction details form, users can, so here we were looking at the direct labor cost account. So here, without choosing project or any other information, we can choose this account and see all the project transactions that have this account either in debit or in credit side. So it is not quite seen here, but it is there are transactions both for debit and credit side. Same is with the account group. There will be transactions with, that have this account group both in debit and in credit side. Also, you can see the hyperlinks in the ARIC doc number section that take us to the originated document that the transaction was originated from. And the description in the ARIC doc type is now clearly filled. Just as a comparison, I'm going to show you how it was previously done. So the ARIC doc type did not always have it was not always filled, even if the document, originated document was existed, and the ARIC doc number was not always filled as well. So it was not very convenient to use. I'm gonna continue with the presentation Okay, for now. So some other enhancements that were made to make sure that the project balance is could be reconciled, and all the figures, all the numbers are correct, and it is easy for the for the users to make sure that everything is correct and to find the transaction that they need, was the troubleshooting. Was the removal of all the inconsistencies. There were a lot of inconsistencies with regards of the project transactions, and well, the first part of the inconsistencies was related to the unbilled reminders. And when the user uses pro forma invoices for bills with the pro forma invoices, they have an opportunity to bill only partially, and then the part leave as set the status hold reminder, and the leave part of the their provisioning for billing for the next billing, and the part that is remained is created as a transaction unbilled reminder. And previously, in the unbilled reminder transactions were not always created. When they were created, they were not considered in the project balance, but it was not clear for the users. So there was a lot of confusion with this unbilled reminders and inconsistencies. So what we did was we made sure that unbilled reminders are always created when the hold reminder in the performer is set true and when there is any reminder left for the unbilled reminder to be created. Then those unbilled reminders, they are included in project balance, but unbilled reminder reversal is created at the same time to eliminate the impact of this unbilled reminder for the project to the project balance. So this unbilled reminder that is left is not actually shown in the project balance, but it is clear why, because the unbilled reminder reversal is created. On the next billing, this unbilled reminder is not billed, so it has billed false. It also is not excluded from billing. So when the user creates next performer or next billing, this reminder will appear in the document. It will not be preceded by the billing rule because it already was preceded with the billing rule, but the amount will appear in the document and user will be able to include it into the document, into the invoice. And for the old unbilled reminders that were created before this feature, they were created without the unbilled reminder reversals, but they were not included into the project balance. As I said, it wasn't clear. So we exposed another field that I mentioned before, excluded from balance, and it is by default, it is false for all transactions except for old unbilled reminders that were created before the upgrade of with this feature. So for them, this excluded from balance will be true. So the users will be able to see why the transaction, if it wasn't included into the project balance, why it was so. I will show that in the live demonstration in a few moments. Next set of inconsistencies was related to the allocation reversals. So there is a process of allocation that users can use to move the transactions to another account group and following the certain rule. And allocation can be set to be reversed either on the generation of error document or the release of the error document, or they can never be reversed. It's also one of the options. But there were inconsistencies with the allocation when they were reversed, whether they were reversed in full amount or when there were some reminders hold, they were reversed only partially as the billed part of that transaction. And it also created a lot of confusion and inconsistencies in the calculations. So now the allocation is always reversed in full amount, which is clear. So when the transaction is billed, even if there is a reminder hold, it is the allocation is reversed in full amount, and in when the reminder is billed the next time, no reversals are created for this allocation. And then if when allocation has the reversal option on our invoice generation, then the allocation reversals are created in status balanced, and they are now automatically released on release of error document, and on if the error document is deleted before being released, the allocation reversal is automatically deleted as well. It is previously allocation reversal was created just in release status, and if error document was deleted, it was set in the system and not reversed or deleted. So now this problem is solved, unless the user would try to manually release allocation reversal before releasing error document. So we recommend not to do that. The system will release the document automatically, or if the error document will be deleted, the system will delete the reversal as well. And another inconsistency that was removed is regarding the logic of the reversal transaction, the appearance. So there were different ways how the reversals were created. In some ways, the reversal was the same as the has the debit account and credit account just the same as the original transaction, and just had the opposite value. And in other cases, there was a flip logic when the debit and credit account just switched places and the amount was the same. It was hard to navigate within the transaction, to reconcile the transaction, and to calculate the total amount on for the account groups, and it just wasn't consistent. So we removed this logic, and now everywhere the reversal is the same as the original transaction that it is reversing, with the opposite value. So it is clear that those transactions go together and they just have the opposite numbers. So it is easier to find them and understand. And finally, for one of the scenarios of accounting of labor cost, when the VIP account group, work in progress account group setting for the project task is used, and when this work in progress account group is not used for billing, so for this scenario, we cleared the logic, because previously it was hard to understand whether it is just a simple allocation or it is this work in progress scenario. So now those transactions have the reversal transaction have work in progress reversal RIGDOC type. It is easier to find them and to understand how they were originated, and also the excluded from billing reason for those transactions is also clear. So they're either work in progress reversed in this process, or for the reversal, it is reversal of these transactions. So it is easier to find the transactions that were created and reversed with that setting. a few more enhancements that were made, that on the project form, actually this enhancement was suggested on the feedback portal to change the totals on this form, and the assets and liabilities forms were removed, but then income and expenses is now actual income, actual expenses. They calculated the same as they were. Then also we added margin that is calculated as income minus expense, and the margin percent, which is income minus expense over income. This so these are the new added values. Some other improvements as well that I already mentioned, but not so clear, I guess. So we renamed the reversal of the allocation reversal settings on the allocation rules form, PM 207500. On project billing setting is now called on IR invoice generation. On invoice release is on IR invoice release. So these are the moment when the allocation reversal transaction is created, either on generation of IR invoice or release of IR invoice. It should be clearer for the users to understand. Also, another enhancement suggested from the feedback portal is to add description for the allocation project transaction project batches, instead of just allocation word, allocation for project number. So it is easier to find transactions, the allocation transactions in the project transaction form and identify them. And before I go to the system and to show you the improvements in the live demo, just a few more important upgrade notes. So I explained the enhancement and the differences between the old unbilled reminders and the new unbilled reminder logic. So it is important to make sure that before the upgrade, the users for the active project do not have any unbilled reminders and unreleased IR documents. Because with the upgrade, when the system is upgraded, if there are any unbilled reminders left, all unbilled reminders or unreleased IR documents, especially if there would be unbilled reminders and those documents, then the system can behave. The system behavior could be unpredictable. But it will follow the old logic, trying to because the transactions will not have all the obligatory marks that they need. So the unreleased document can be found in this report, and then all the released together. How to find unbilled reminders for the active projects, users can run project billing, and then all the unbilled reminders will appear, if there are any, will appear in the proforma or in the document. Well, it's better to set up to use the proforma and then to either write off those reminders or to bill them before the upgrade of the system. And after the upgrade, it is good to make a random project balance validation check to make sure that all the numbers are correct and nothing was affected by the upgrade. And again, all the unbilled reminders that were created before the upgrade, they will not have the reversals. They will not be included into the balance, but they will have excluded from balance true, which should help users to navigate themselves, to find those unbilled reminders and to understand why those values are not included into the project balance. So now, again, a quick demonstration. So what was here before the upgrade? We had the transaction that was allocated, and then the IR invoice was released with just partially with the unbilled reminders. So as could be seen here, it is unclear what transactions are this ones and whether this one is a reminder or not. It is unclear that this reminder is not included into the project balance. So there are a lot of confusion. Now, in the new version and with the new feature, this transaction is allocated, so it has allocated true, and then allocation transaction here was billed. So we have the invoice a number here, billed true, and all allocation ARIC type. Then all the other transactions, they also have description. So this transaction is the created unbilled reminder that was originated by the release of this IR document. The reminder reversal that is excluded from allocation, from billing, and is simply needed to eliminate the impact of this unbilled reminder on the project balance. We have the allocation reversal that was created, and we can see that it is a reversal of transaction ID and then ID number of this transaction. So it is easy to find the pairs and to understand whether the transaction was the reversal of that one or not, and whether it and to find the correlated transaction. And then the revenue transaction that was created as well. So it is a result of IR invoice and then the number of the IR invoice. So and if we want to have a look at the as I showed here, some the example of the project what was created before the upgrade. So once we upgrade the system, we will see something like that. We will see the same values. We won't obviously see the values that were not created before that, but we will have this excluded from balance value true for the transaction that was an unbilled reminder and will not be included into the calculation of the project balance here. So for now, I think it's everything that I wanted to tell you about this section. If you have any questions on the part that I just described, please let me know. No? Okay, then I'm gonna switch again to the presentation and just tell you a few more things about other enhancements that we implemented in 2020 R1 Better. And well, first of all, on the common tasks form, we added the opportunity to import budgets from Excel. You will see the icons that allow that. On project transaction details form that I was just talking a lot about, and the URL of the form added the filter parameters, which is now make it easier to send the links, to refresh the page without losing all the information entered, and just easy and to save the page if it is needed. Important for those who work with the reports, the time card required is now do not have the null value. It is excluded, and by default, this parameter has value 0, and there are only values 0 and 1s. We changed the warning message for the cost code if the user tries to create a project transaction with the cost code, if the cost code feature is on, that is not in the project budget for that project as an account group. So they warning message is now more descriptive and should allow user more information and easier way to troubleshoot the issue. And we added the opportunity to set individual transaction match settings for different cache accounts. So previously it was just one setting for all, and now it is different for if it could be for different cache accounts, and it also could be set reset to default values. And the column default is added to cost code form, which helps you, which will help now users to understand which cost code is a default one, even if they change the description, which was the issue. So I guess for now it is all. If you have any questions, please do ask. Or you will be able to go through the presentation, as Tamara said, and do not hesitate to send us any questions regarding these features and enhancements.
Okay, thank you so much, Anastasia, for such a nice and detailed presentation. I will just quickly wrap up through all the enhancements introduced in Acumatica 2020 R1 beta in projects and time and expenses modules. So now we support the full stack of project retainage modes, which include the standard with steps, contract cap with steps, and contract item cap. Then numerous project balance reconciliation enhancements, which help you to reconcile project transactions, general ledger transactions, and project balance, and which eliminate various inconsistencies in the project processes. What is more, we have introduced enhancements to our project transactions inquiries, and also we have some miscellaneous enhancements on different forms, such as projects form, common tasks form, project transactions and commitments form, some other enhancements concerning employee time cards, employee attributes, comprehensive missing cost code warning, and process bank transactions process. And also now you can easily identify which cost code is your default one. Basically, that's it from our side, and we will post this recording and the presentation used during this demo shortly. Thank you so much for your attention. Your feedback and your questions are highly appreciated, and please feel free to address all of them to us. Many thanks.
Tamara, Anastasia, thanks so much for the great presentation. We got a question from Louis. Are there any plans to consolidate invoice for a customer with multiple projects? Well, we have this feature shortlisted. We are aware of this need, and hopefully we'll get to that feature sooner than later. So it is shortlisted, but there is no ETA at the moment.
Okay, if there are no questions for now, thank you so much for your attention. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.